The human who defied the frozen world, bound by blood, claimed by an alien queen. The wind shifted before the scouts returned, carrying a scent Eli recognized too well. Smoke braided with machine oil. Not campfire smoke. Engine breath. Civilization. The kind that arrived with boot treads and manifests. He tasted it in the cold and felt his shoulders tense, as if he'd already heard a commander's whistle. The White Fang did as they had planned. They vanished. Fires were banked to cold ash. Sled tracks brushed with dried brush. Caches buried under crusted drifts. In the wide white of Kitharon, erasing yourself was an art. Under Eli's direction, they broke into claws of 3 and 4, each group a quiet knife along the ravine edges, the ice hummocks, the glittering fields where a careless footstep could ring like a bell. Lyra moved among them with that terrible, gorgeous calm that made even fear obedient. When she came to Eli, she did not ask if he doubted. She took his wrist, pressed his palm to the map scratched in the snow and said, "Bite here." She tapped the throat of a canyon where the red claw would funnel. "Bleed here." She marked the slope above it, then softer, only for him, "And live here." Her finger rested over his heartbeat as if the skin between them had grown thin. The first ambush worked exactly as it had inside Eli's head. Red Claw scouts, confident and loud, came singing down the wind-scoured path, their red-dyed furs snarling against the white. They did not bother with stealth. Numbers made them lazy. They reached the narrow throat and the ice sang. A second later, the throat collapsed. Sleds went pitching. Warriors tumbled into a choked bowl as White Fang's spears rained down, and Eli's rifle spit its thunder in short, cold bursts that punched holes through confidence. Then the White Fang were gone again, a ghostly retreat before the red could turn. It should have taken the Red Claw a full day to recover and reorient. Instead, they corrected course in an hour and came straight toward the hidden caches as if tugged by a string. The second ambush landed, but just barely. The Red Claw adjusted without hesitation, firing incendiaries into the brush where White Fang had always hidden, as if reading a script Eli hadn't shared. They moved not like the wild nomads White Fang tales had sharpened into legend, but like soldiers working under maps and orders, their skirmish lines unnervingly clean. Eli stood with Kyle on a rim of wind-polished ice, watching the enemy pivot like a machine that had learned their rhythm after only a beat. The scarred warrior's jaw worked as if he were cracking bone. "We cut them," Kyle said, voice low. "They bleed, but they know where to put their feet." "They shouldn't," Eli said. His breath burned the air. "Nobody knows White Fang erasures this fast unless they've studied them. Or," he trailed off, eyes narrowing, "or they have eyes inside our sleds," Kyle finished. They returned to camp as evening turned the tundra blue. Eli went through every cache and sling line with the precision of someone who had learned, too late, to assume only the worst. He found nothing in the obvious places. No terracotta bead that was too light to be clay. No bone whistle with foreign screws. He was halfway through tearing apart a harness buckle when a thought struck him hard enough to feel like cold water. Not gear, not sleds. Breath quickening, he crossed the camp in 3 strides and knelt by the little bed of furs near the fire. The cub, Lyra's son, slept as children sleep when armies pack up around them, utterly surrendered to dreams. On his wrist, a charm braided from white hair and sinew glowed under a crust of frost. It was beautiful in a way Eli's world had forgotten how to be. Small knots, a tiny shard of polished ice, a bead that shimmered with trapped light. He brushed a thumb across the bead. The light inside it pulsed, not with magic, with cadence. "Don't," Lyra said suddenly beside him, voice low but braced like a spear. Eli looked up. "How long has he worn this?" "Since the storm," she said. "I tied it myself." Hurt flickered across her eyes, too quick to take root. He would not sleep without it. Eli set his jaw, tugged the braid's knot with surgeon care, laid the charm in his palm. He brought it close to the heat stone's ember glow. Inside the bead, beneath layers of glittering resin, something metallic sighed. A microskeleton of wires so fine they looked grown, a sliver of circuit like a frost feather. He'd seen cousins of this seed on convoy routes, under collars, sewn into journal spines. Off-world work, Terran finesse. Kyle loomed over them. "What is it?" A whisper, Eli said. His voice didn't sound like his. He closed his fist around the charm as if the warmth of his hand could crush a signal. To anything that knows how to listen. Lyra's breath hitched once. The sound of a mother realizing the storm she feared wasn't out there, but braided in her child's hair. You think I would? No, Eli said hard. But someone did. Those wounds in the snow, the ones that brought him to my door, they were messy, loud, perfect to make us move fast and stop checking. He held up the charm. This is why they've been reading our feet. Kale's roar was not for battle but grief. He spun, barking orders that snapped through the camp like a whip. Warriors scattered, every one of them suddenly a knife hunting another knife. Lyra's hands trembled only when they touched her son's wrist. She stilled them with will, as she did everything, and gathered her child against her chest, eyes shut for one heartbeat longer than her law allowed. Eli crossed to his kit, dug for a strip of lead mesh he'd once used to make his stove behave. He wrapped the charm in it, tight. The pulse died, or at least he couldn't feel it anymore. His work felt like putting a lid on a scream. Who could plant it? Kale demanded. Anyone who touched him between the storm and now, Eli said. But think about who benefits. The Red Claw move like someone is drawing lines for them, someone who knows how to pay for maps. He glanced at the package charm, bile rising. Someone who trades in people more than in land. Lyra watched him as if the ground itself had asked for an oath. Your people. He forced himself not to flinch. Not mine, he said. But yes, Terrans. The kind who take contracts where the ink is thicker than the law. He lifted the wrapped bead. And the kind who could sell this to any clan willing to scorch a valley to close a ledger. The whisper of engines he'd smelled became a sound, gossamer thin under the wind at first, then steady enough to rattle the edges of the heat-stone dish. Eli looked up, truly looked, and saw shadows where the sky had been clean an hour ago. 3, then 4, then... He stopped counting. They flew low, not like military craft staking a claim, but like traders who knew no one would tell them no. On their bellies, lights winked, not the soft lanterns of White Fang night marches, but the cold blinks of directional arrays reading a beacon. Lyra lifted her son and stood very still, the way predators do when the world shifts and they choose a single point to anchor on. So, she said softly, almost conversationally, all the stories were true. Which stories? Eli asked, though he knew. The ones about the sky stealing children, she said. Eli tasted metal again. He tossed the wrapped bead to Kale. Deep snow. Smash it. Kale didn't ask where. He sprinted for the ravine as if the cliff had insulted him personally. Eli turned to Lyra, pulse loud. We move the camp now. We break into claws and never make a line they can read. If those ships are what I think they are, they don't care what flag Red Claw flies. They'll bleed both clans if it makes the math pretty. Lyra's gaze held his like a set stone. You know them. I know the kind, he said. He didn't say their names. Mercenaries rebranded as stability contractors. Surveyors who tiled ground with sensors and called it peace. The men who cashed out his last unit's ghosts and sent him to the ice with a pension no one could trace. He reached for Lyra's arm, hesitated, didn't. I won't let them take him. She lifted her chin, an answer and a dare. They will have to take me first. Cal returned a minute later, hands empty, chest heaving, eyes bright with a wild light that had nothing to do with fear. Buried and broken, he said, but the birds in the sky do not blink slower. Because the bead was one whisper, Eli said. The taste of old orders sat heavy on his tongue. There's another. There always is. He felt for the shape of his rifle as if muscle memory might point him toward an answer. Then he froze. Fingers stalled at the upper receiver. On the forward rail, tucked under a strap he'd replaced himself last winter, sat a matte black wedge the size of a fingernail. A thing so ordinary his eye had slid past it 100 times. It looked like a rail spacer. It was in another life. He pried it off with his knife. Inside the same delicate skeleton, a thought grown on a wafer. Lyra saw it too, and for one heartbeat, something brittle flashed across her face, sharp as broken glaçage. Not doubt of him, never that, but the cruelty of what faith must do to live. They followed you, she said. He nodded once, the ground swaying. Always have. I just didn't hear the boots anymore. They didn't speak further. There was no time. The first craft cut a low arc over the far ridge, the wind of its passage shivering the snow like a giant hand, raking its fingers through white grass. On its flank, the paint was clean as a lie. Azuran security, stability through presence. Eli laughed. It came out wrong. Stability through presence, he repeated, and it sounded like a prayer someone had turned inside out. Lyra stepped close enough that her shoulder knocked his, close enough that their son reached sleepy fingers toward the thunder overhead and smiled, as if he'd dreamed this once and liked it. "Tell me how to kill them," she said. "On the ground," Eli said. "Like anything else. Bleed their fuel, eat their feet. In the sky." He inhaled once, slow, steady, finding the soldier's box in his chest where panic never fit. "You don't. You make the sky so ugly it doesn't want you." "How?" "Smoke they can't read. Heat they can't name. Ice they can't trust." He pointed to the ravine, the vents that breathed sulfur on wind-change days, the scabbed black stone where the world's old bones showed. "We turned the earth into a lie. It took minutes to set and consume them whole. Warriors split to their claws. Kale led 2 bands to the vents with sled loads of wet brush and fat rendered from the frost maw. Others fetched pitch beetle tar, the sticky black that never stopped burning if it liked you. Eli opened the caches he'd told no one about. Flares, magnesium cans, a spool of wire he'd called a sentimental keep, but had kept because wire was just a problem that hadn't confessed its shape yet. He grinned, teeth bare, and strung the wire across the mouth of the canyon where a landing skiff would come low, pegging it with bone stakes and curses he'd learned from engineers who never washed their hands. The first skiff tried to drop in clean, reading the ravine as a quiet throat. Its belly kissed wire and screamed. The pilot overcorrected. The skiff bit snow, tumbled, sheared a wing, and howled to a stop in a plume of glitter. White fang claws were there before the dust had a chance to settle, pulling strangers from belts and introducing them to a world that didn't want them. But for every skiff that fell, another threaded through. Floodlights scoured the drifts, turning hiding warriors into puppet shadows that moved just a whisper too slow to dodge a beam. Lyra barked orders that sounded like old prayers given new teeth. The white fang moved like night, but night had eyes now. Eli kept his eyes on Lyra and the child even when he wanted to split himself into 10 bodies to sew every open wound with wire. He felt where the next landing would be and set another trick, then another. He was busy enough to forget breathing until the big shadow arrived, the kind of craft that didn't need to land to take what it wanted. It hung above them like a question mark, engine soft, posture elegant, as if it considered even gravity a social agreement it could renegotiate. On its nose, an emblem no clan would bother painting. A stylized compass rose whose cardinal points had been replaced by a currency symbol he'd seen stamped on ration tins from here to Nemours. A voice fell from its belly, translated a dozen times until it sounded like a drunk customer ordering peace. "White Fang Clan. Custodial reclamation is in effect. Surrender the hybrid specimen in the fugitive Terran Eli Veron. You will be compensated in trade goods and security credits. Failure to comply will void protections under Azuran Covenant Clause Number 7. Lyra laughed, one bright note in a night of iron. "Number 7, she said. "Lucky." She looked at Eli sidelong, and in her gaze he saw what the old songs called marriage. Not binding by law, but standing back to back, while sky wove a noose. "What is hybrid specimen?" Eli stared at the craft until the muscles around his eyes hurt. "A story they tell their investors to make theft sound like a harvest," he said. "A lie that pays." The voice droned on, legal and bored. Compliance window closing. 3 minutes. Lyra handed her son to Kale. The big warrior took the child as if the weight would break him and held on anyway. She stepped so close to Eli that the heat between them made a small weather. "If I tell them no," she said quietly, "they will break their window into our roof." "They will," he said. "If I give them you, they will take him anyway." "They will," he said again, and the words scraped. She studied him for the second it takes a leader to read 2 futures and pick the one that hates you less. "Then we do not give them anything." He smiled, something feral blooming in his chest he had thought starved to bone. "That's the first plan anyone's offered me in years that makes sense." "Compliance window closing," the voice said cheerfully, as if counting down to a festival. Talk to them, Lyra said. Eli blinked. Pardon? You speak the sky's language, she said, and I want them to hear what it sounds like when a man they made refuses to be measured. He took the speaking rod Kale had stolen from the fallen skiff, tech as old as he was, simple enough that it didn't need a translator, honest enough to take a story in one end and spit it out the other without adding sugar. He keyed it with a thumb press that felt like putting a hand on a stove ring and lifted it to his mouth. This is Eli Veron, he said. His voice traveled clean. The big ship listened without breathing. Your contract is void. Your reclamation is refused. Your presence is theft. There was a pause, surprise maybe, or the careful tap of keys, men who had to find the right clause that would make a refusal into a mistake. Then the voice returned, amused. Mr. Veron, at last. You know how this works. We close windows for a living. Step forward onto open ground. Kneel. Hands behind your head. We'll be merciful to your friends. Eli looked at Lyra. She did not shake her head, did not nod. She gave him what no commander had, the dignity of his own desk vote. He cut the channel. Get your claws to the vents, he said to Kale. Smoke, heat. I want the air to taste wrong. Lyra's hand found his. It was absurd, childlike, exactly what he needed. And you, she asked. He squeezed once. I open a different window. He walked into the open, out beyond the last trembling halo of the torches, into the white that had been the only friend he trusted for 3 years. He raised the rod again. All right, he said. Let's see your mercy. The ship lowered a cradle of light, and from the ground beyond it, out of the Red Claw ranks that had watched this sky theater with the fascination of villagers seeing their river turn to glass, a figure stepped forward and raised a red banner high. She was tall as Lyra, her furs richer, her scars deliberate art. Her hair was the same impossible white. Her eyes were gold and colder. She smiled up at the ship and then across the snow at Lyra, like a sister sharing a joke only they would get. Hello, sister, she called, her voice caring as if the cold loved it. You have something that belongs to me? Lyra did not move. Naira, she said, and the name was a blade. You died. Naira laughed, bright and clean. I changed business. The ship purred, pleased with its stage. Compliance window closed, it said, proceeding to collection. The world held its breath, and then the sky fell. The first blast didn't sound like thunder. Thunder is honest. It rolls in, announces itself, and leaves you time to pray. This sound was clipped and polite, a pressure change pop followed by a low, endless roar as superheated air turned snow into steam. The flank of the ridge boiled white. The white fang lines scattered, 100 shadows flicking into different directions at once. Eli reached for Lyra and didn't find her because she was already moving, sliding past him like wind past a rock, a spear in her hand that hadn't been there a heartbeat ago. Kale pushed the child into a shadow cut between 2 ice pillows and crouched over him with his whole body, a mountain deciding which avalanche it would kill when it came. The ship deployed a lattice, thin cables that dropped like rain and bit into the snow, each one humming at a pitch that made Eli's teeth ache. A containment net. He'd seen one wrap an entire village once. Men in suits standing at the edges, arguing over where to put the compensation tent. He shook the memory out and went for the wire spool. Lyra barked a word Eli didn't know. 10 white fang claws answered, hauling pitch tar across the vents. The first vomit of smoke took the sky's neat geometry and smudged it like a wet thumb on a chalk map. The second turned floodlights into soft coins. The third made the ship choose. Rise above the dirty air and lose accuracy, or come lower and taste a ground that didn't like steel. It came lower. Good, Eli muttered, knifing the spool's wire under one of the humming cables. He pinned it, looped it, dragged the other end around a buried anchor of basalt, and leaned all his weight into it. The cable's hum changed key. Somewhere along its length, a clamp sensed resistance and tightened, and that meant power, and power meant he could give it a gift. Kyle, Eli shouted, magnesium cans! Kyle hurled one with the casual accuracy of a man who could throw a house through another house if he had to. Eli caught, yanked its tab, and shoved the flaring core under the strung wire. Heat ate the cable's patience. Elastic integrity became failure. The lattice sagged on one side and the ship corrected to keep tension, drifting into the vortex of its own control. The ground waited. The ravine's lip crowded up like an eager audience. Red Claw warriors charged under the lowering net, thinking White Fang would be dazzled by sky and forget the Earth's manufacture. Eli watched two fall through a snow bridge he'd mined with emptiness. He had learned from old sappers that a hole is just the most elegant weapon. He did not cheer. There wasn't time. Naira walked through chaos as if it were weather she had ordered for her hair. She did not look at Eli. She looked at Lyra, and every step was a story the sisters had told themselves as children, when words still braided instead of frayed. Red paint scored Naira's cheeks in ritual lines. The edges were too clean. A hand with a glove had done them. "You carry a foreigner like a ring," Nira called across the smoke, "and you wonder why the sky rings your valley. Sister, you always did mistake storms for omens. They're just bill collectors." Lyra didn't break stride. She veered not toward the ship, not yet, but toward Naira, as if the only gravity that mattered lived inside that terrible smile. "You allied with them," Lyra said, and the word allied was the worst insult she had. "You sell your dead for credit." Naira's eyes glinted. "I sell futures," she said. "What did you do? Tie one to your bedside and call it a bond?" Eli would have given part of himself to not understand the next look that crossed Lyra's face. In it was a secret he had not asked to hold, that the cub she had called son was not just hers. That blood knew another name. That family on this ice was rope knotted out of weather and dead men's promises, and knots could be cut. "I should have burned the old songs," Naira went on, basking in the place where pain made words bright. "I should have married you riven to a Red Claw king. Instead, I brought you a merciful end. Give me the child and the Terran, and I make you a chief in a world that does not starve when winter is late." Lyra's answer was not words. It was a spear thrown with such savage grace that the air around it lost the habit of being air and behaved for a second like a road. Nira bent. The spear sprinted past her jaw, kissing a red bead off her braid, and buried itself in the snow with a sound like a stake going into a saint. Nira laughed, delighted, turned her palm upward, and the ship's belly flashed, some gesture coded in some language Eli hated. And a second skiff peeled off, angling not for the fight but for the shadow where Kale knelt over the child. Eli didn't think. He ran. He had always run this way when a line broke, not toward safety but toward the place a line would be if the world were fair. He reached the shadow as the skiff's light opened like a flower. A man leaned out, helmet, visor, soft armor, with a corporate logo he was probably told to call a crest. He held a loop that glittered and hummed and smelled like ionized regret. A compliance collar. It wasn't sized for a child. It would fit anyone. "Don't," Eli said. The visor turned. "Mr. Varon," the man said as if greeting a neighbor. "Good to see you vertical. Leadership is full of bad options. Let us take two off your plate." Cal rose like a cliff, finding it had a spine. "He is not your child," he said. "He is not yours either," the man said gently, because men who sell cages often learn to sound like priests. "He is property under Article—" Kyle tore the door off the skiff. The man inside got one look at the expression on Kyle's face and decided his articles had poor reach. He grabbed for a stunner. Eli slammed his rifle against the man's wrist, hard enough to make nerves forget their work. The stunner fell. Cal used the door like a club. The skiff danced sideways, skidding across hardpack and plowing into a snow buttress that had been a White Fang hut yesterday and would be a story tomorrow. "Thank you," Eli said to Cal. Kyle said nothing. He crouched back over the child whose eyes were open and very calm, as if he had decided that whatever game his uncles were playing would be fun when he was older. Another blast went off, hammering the breath out of the camp. The skyship had decided it was done being coy. It dropped a canister that burst into a cloud so fine it looked like a thought. Warriors who inhaled it stumbled, eyes watering, lungs clawing, muscles forgetting choreography and choosing panic. Not death, panic. It was mercy packaged in a dose that made surrender feel like a good idea. Eli grabbed a scarf from the nearest sled and tied it over the child's nose and mouth, then did the same for himself and Kale. He yelled for oil rags, for water to wet them. The White Fang adapted with frightening speed. They had lived their whole lives making breath count. "Enough," Lyra said somewhere inside the smoke. "I am done speaking to engines." Eli found her by sound, the way you find a drum in fog. She was halfway up the ravine lip, moving not toward the ship but toward a taller outcrop beyond it, black rock that remembered fire. She scrambled, slipped, kicked free, rose again, a creature that had never learned how to stop. Eli followed because his body had learned, somewhere between the child's sleep and the first time Lyra had looked at him like hunger and weather both, that this was its job. At the top, the vista opened. The ship above, the red claw ranks below like a rash on white skin. The white fang in their smoke cloud, a single breathing animal. Lyra planted her feet on old lava, spine straight as if the stone had flowed up inside her and cooled there. "Naira!" she shouted. Her sister's gold gaze snapped up. She rested one hand on the banner pole and cocked her head. "Yes?" "We will make terms," Lyra said. Below, men in helmets checked their latches as if the word terms required new hardware. Eli's stomach sank. He trusted Lyra's courage more than his own lungs, but bargaining with a ship was like asking a knife to be round. Naira smiled like a friend at a door. "At last," Lyra lifted her chin. "One duel." The word cracked the air. Even the ship listened. Nira threw her head back and laughed, genuinely delighted. "Sister, you are beautiful. A duel in a fog of poison under a cruel accountant's eye? And what do you wager?" "Everything," Lyra said. "Winner takes all. The child, the clans, the ground." She looked up at the ship and bared her teeth. "And you will leave." The ship answered, friendly, utterly uninterested in local drama. "We regret to inform you Azuran does not recognize outcomes adjudicated by—" Eli raised the rod and cut the ship off. "I do," he said, "and I am your target. You want a face to show your board? Film this. You call it culture. You'll package it as respect." He was gambling now with a market's vanity, and he felt filthy and very alive. "If you deny this, you're just thieves with prettier words." A long pause. He could hear the clink of decision-making, the scrape of a man in a clean shirt turning to another man and saying, "Look, it reads well if it reads old." Then the voice came back, benign. "Azuran will honor the adjudication of a duel between recognized leaders as a provisional outcome under clause number 11. Non-lethal support authorized. Spectator presence permitted. Begin." Nira's smile did a slow, pleased turn. "Listen to you," she said to Eli, "teaching the sky how to purr." She shrugged off her cloak and walked into the open, spear in one hand, hook axe in the other. "Come then, sister. Let's end this for the children." Lyra's fingers brushed Eli's for a single heartbeat. He had never wanted to say, "Don't more" in his life. He said it anyway. "Don't." She looked at him, and in that look were 10 winters, 3 songs, a child asleep, a night that had remade both of them without asking permission. "I am not giving you to them," she said, "and I am not giving him to her." She stepped down the slope with the balance of someone who had been a blade since before she was born. They met on a flat of black stone where old heat had smoothed bad ideas into a table. The ship steadied above, floodlights making a stage. Red Claw and White Fang stood in their smoke and snow and watched 2 women with the same eyes argue with their bodies. Naira struck first, light and fast, testing. Lyra parried with the bone of her forearm and answered with a cut that would have ruined a lesser fighter. Naira grinned, delighted, like a child finding a favorite toy in a box she'd hidden from herself. The hook axe came low. Lyra leaped it, rolled, came up inside Naira's guard, and bit with her spear point. The sound Naira made was not pain. It was pleasure at a problem become interesting. Below, the ship filmed. It always filmed. Blows traded, blood came. The floodlights made it silver. Naira fought like revenue. Relentless, inventive, never spent. Lyra fought like weather, implacable, patient, then sudden. "Give me the boy," Naira said between strikes, almost conversational. "He is mine by blood." "By yours," Lyra said, and her voice had the weight of a law accepted by a mountain. "By mine by choice." Naira's mouth thinned. She came hard, the hook finding purchase. Lyra twisted, let it take what it would, left part of her cloak behind like a lizard tail, and slid under Nira's arm. Her spear butt hammered Nira's knee. The older sister faltered for the first time. Eli wanted to run down there and make a wrong choice. He wanted to shoot the floodlight and lie about accidents. He wanted 10 things, none of which were offered. Instead, he looked up at the ship and found the eye that mattered, a glossy lens with no soul, and behind it a man telling himself a story about neutrality. He raised the rod. "Boardroom," he said softly, though his breath smoked bright. "Listen, if she dies, I will hunt you across Virelia and Quorith and Azurin's own dock. I will teach your investors the names of the villages you burned into footnotes. I will make your due diligence feel like grief." He put a smile in his voice because terror sells better that way. "Or you can leave with a clip that plays well in the markets." The voice did not answer. He hadn't expected it to. But the ship hesitated just a little, and ships that hesitate get heavier in the wrong places. On the slate, Naira found her rhythm again and pressed. She talked as she worked because she was the kind of fighter who could write minutes and stab you between them. "You always wanted a story, Lyra," she said. "You wanted the sky to sing when you walked." She fainted high, the hook bit low. Lyra hissed. Blood brightened the black. "Here is a story. Your Terran will tire of winter. He will leave, and you will find yourself a widow of a living man." Lyra's answer came like a blade through paper. "You mistake him for a season," she said. "He is a decision." She stepped inside Naira's guard again, and then the twist came. Not from the ship, not from Redclaw, but from the stone. The ground under Lyra's lead foot shifted. A patch of glassy rock, warmed by a skiff's earlier pass, gave up its last firmness. She slid, not much, just enough. Nira's hook whipped up for the throat, perfect and final. Eli moved before he knew there was movement in him to offer. He didn't have time to reach the black stone. He didn't have time to shout a thing that would land before the hook. He did the one unwise, wholly exact thing left. He shot the hook's haft. The bullet cracked wood, twisted the arc. The iron curve kissed Lyra's jaw instead of opening it, and she spun with the hit, turned it into motion, and planted her spear through Naira's shoulder so clean the air complemented her form. Silence held, stunned, beautiful. Then the world erupted. Redclaw roared outrage. Whitefang howled awe. The ship's floodlights jittered as the camera op laughed or cursed through his mask. Nira staggered, then steadied, and in her eyes was a new heat. Respect, hate's sister. "You cheated," she said to Eli, smiling like a funeral dancer. "Alive is the only rule I keep," he said. Lyra, bleeding and brilliant, wrenched her spear free and stepped back into stance. "Again," she said. Naira's gaze flicked to the ship. Calculus wrote itself along her cheekbones. She lowered her hook a fraction. "No," she said. "Enough for a market's appetite." She pulled the spear through her own wound, hissed as the iron kissed her, and then lifted her chin. "Azurin recognizes the duel," she called, laughter in her voice as if she told a joke only those who ate policies for breakfast would get. "Provisional outcome. Whitefang keeps their toy and their wolf." She pointed the hook at Eli like a blessing. "For now." The ship's voice responded almost tenderly. "Acknowledged. Clause number 11 satisfied. Azurin presence will de-escalate to observational protocol." Which meant, we're not leaving. We are simply calling our hunger something else. Nira tore a strip from her cloak, tied her wound with theatrical efficiency, and smiled up at the camera. "This valley is an asset," she said, "but it is also a song, and songs are patient." She looked to Lyra, then to Eli. "Enjoy your winter, sister. Enjoy your decision, Terran. When the thaw comes, so will I." She gestured. The Redclaw pulled back in neat tears, the way soldiers do when someone with a better map has told them the story has moved to a different page. The ship rose not far, just enough to remind the ground what altitude felt like, and drifted toward a new vantage that gave it a good angle on grief. The smoke thinned. The vents sighed. Whitefang stood with weapons low, the kind of tired that isn't in muscle, but in the part of a person that keeps track of which gods have already been asked. Eli walked to Lyra. She didn't fall into him because she would not. She let him be near because he had earned it. Up close, the cut at her jaw looked like a line someone had drawn to show a sculptor where to stop. Blood darkened her collar. Her eyes were very bright. "You cheated," she said, and the words were not an accusation. "I did," he said. "I'll do it again." She nodded once, a queen acknowledging a subject who had surprised her pleasantly. "Good." Cal brought the child. The boy reached for both of them, small hands impatient with ceremony. Eli lifted him because his body wanted to, and because some laws are older than all the others. The child's golden eyes regarded him gravely, then turned to the ship as if memorizing an enemy's face for a later drawing. Lyra touched Eli's shoulder, then his cheek where the wind had cracked it, then the place over his heart where she had put her finger on the snow map. "They will come back," she said. "Yes," he said. "Nira will not stop," she said. "I know. She will tell truths to make lies walk." "I know that too." Lyra's hand tightened. "Then hear this truth," she said, low enough that only the ice could eavesdrop. "The boy is my blood. He is also hers, but he is ours by choice. And when the sky counts, it cannot count that." Eli looked down at the child, who yawned as if the universe bored him today, then up at the ship hanging like a price tag. "Then let them learn new math." Below them, White Fang began to move again, not with the drunken joy of victory, but with the sober competence of people who had been allowed to live another day and knew it was not a gift but a loan. Sleds were righted, nets cut, the tar smothered. Warriors picked the skiff for parts. In this climate, even theft was honest. You borrowed from the dead to pay the living. Eli stood with Lyra and the child on the black rock while the wind dared him to make a promise, and the ship overhead dared him to break it. He took a breath that tasted like sulfur and frost and smoke and decisions. "We make the vents a city," he said. "We lace the ravines with wire and holes. We turn their cameras into eyes that lie. And we teach every red claw within 100 miles that marching behind a ship only makes you easier to see." Lyra's golden eyes burned. "And when Nira calls again?" He smiled without kindness. "We answer." The ship drifted. The sky pretended to be simple. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, rich men in warm rooms raised glasses to a clip that would play well in morning briefings. On the rock, a woman who had refused a window and a man who had broken a rule stood with a child who had become a reason, and the ice listened as if it might remember how to be more than cold. Kithrin turned its face to the stars, and chose. The smoke of the duel had barely lifted when the White Fang camp dissolved into fevered noise. Warriors argued, voices cracking like the ice itself. Some wanted to press the red claw now, to bleed them while Nira nursed her wound. Others whispered fear of the sky ship, glancing up at the shadow that still circled above like a carrion bird. Eli stood at the edge of it, the boy heavy in his arms, watching Lyra hold the storm with her voice alone. "No!" she snapped at a warrior who demanded vengeance. "No, we do not throw ourselves against red claw lines while their sky still watches. That is not courage. That is feeding wolves your own heart." The warrior growled back, but her gaze silenced him. Eli saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the blood still drying along her jaw, but she didn't waver. She never wavered. When she turned toward him, the crowd parted as if by instinct. Eli felt the shift. The eyes now saw him not only as the Terran who had survived the circle or the frostmaw, but as the man who had interfered in a sacred duel and kept their chieftain alive. Respect and unease twisted together in their stares. Lyra reached him, her hand brushing briefly over the boy's head before resting against Eli's arm. Her touch was grounding, but her eyes carried the storm still raging inside. "You should not have fired," she murmured, voice low enough only he could hear. Eli's jaw clenched. "And if I hadn't?" Her lips curved in something not quite a smile, not quite a warning. "Then I would have joined the ice, and White Fang would have sung my name until spring." "Yeah, well," Eli muttered, shifting the boy in his arms. "I'm not much for songs." She studied him a moment longer, then exhaled. "Perhaps I should be grateful that you break laws when it suits you." He raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps?" Lyra's smirk was fleeting, swallowed by the weight of command. She turned back to the gathered clan, her voice rising. "We hold here. We bleed the sky with smoke. We bleed the red claw with lies. We teach both that White Fang does not break. We endure." The roar of approval was thunderous. Spears slammed against shields, chants rising until even the circling ship seemed to hesitate. Eli felt it, deep in his bones. The White Fang weren't broken. They were sharpening. That night the camp settled uneasily. Warriors muttered around fires, glancing often toward the sky ship's pale glow above. Children huddled close to mothers, their eyes wide with questions no one could answer. Eli sat alone near the sleds, cleaning his rifle by lamplight, though it needed no cleaning. His hands needed something to do. His mind was too full. He didn't hear Lyra approach until she was beside him, her presence as silent as falling snow. She lowered herself onto the log beside him, her cloak brushing his shoulder. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "You have made me weak." Eli blinked, looking up sharply. "That's a hell of an opening line." Her golden eyes met his, fierce even in the flickering light. "When you fired, you broke the duel. You broke the law. And yet, my people cheered. They looked at me not as a leader who faltered, but as a leader worth saving. That's weakness to you?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing the scars on his hand. "It is something worse. It is trust." Eli's chest tightened. "And you don't like trusting?" She shook her head, pale hair catching the firelight. "Trust gets you killed. Ask Nira." The name dropped heavy between them. He hadn't forgotten. The twist of sister against sister, of bloodlines crossing like blades. He studied her profile, the strength in it, the cracks only he seemed to see. "What happened between you two?" he asked quietly. Lyra's jaw tightened. "A choice. Mine to stay, hers to leave. I called it betrayal. She called it freedom. And the boy?" Her eyes flicked to the child sleeping by the fire. Kyle still watchful beside him. For once her voice faltered. "Her blood. My bond." Eli swallowed hard. "And now ours." The words left his mouth before he thought them through. But once they were out, he didn't regret them. Lyra turned her gaze back to him, and for a heartbeat the fire between them burned brighter than any clan, any law, any war. She leaned closer, her lips brushing his ear. "Do not make me weak again," she whispered. His pulse thundered, his body leaning instinctively into hers. "Then stop looking at me like that." Her laugh was soft, dangerous. "Never." And then, just as their lips nearly met, a shout tore through the camp. "Movement! On the ridge!" Eli sprang to his feet, rifle ready. Warriors surged toward the perimeter, spears raised, voices cracking through the night. Lyra's eyes narrowed, fire replaced by iron. "So soon," she hissed. Eli felt it too. The war hadn't waited. The Red Claw were already here. They came not in columns this time, but in shadows. Red Claw warriors moved along the ridges, their red-painted furs stark against the snow. Torches flared, horns blew, and the White Fang camp erupted into chaos. Eli fired into the night, his shots cracking like thunder across the plain. Warriors clashed, steel against bone, blood spattering the snow. Kyle roared like a beast, cutting through the enemy lines with his axe, while Lyra's spear flashed golden in the firelight. And amid the chaos, Eli saw her. Nira. She stood on the far ridge, cloak billowing, her golden eyes locked on Lyra through the smoke and snow. She raised her hand, and the Red Claw surged forward with renewed fury. Eli's stomach twisted. The duel had ended, but the war was far from over. The camp exploded into motion. The Red Claw poured down the ridges like an avalanche of steel and fur, their painted cloaks blazing crimson in the torchlight. Horns wailed, high and guttural, echoing across the frozen plain until the night itself seemed to scream. Eli slammed a new mag into his rifle, bracing against an overturned sled. He sighted down the scope and squeezed. The first Red Claw warrior in his line of sight jerked back, crimson fur blooming darker as the bullet tore through him. White Fang warriors surged forward to meet the charge, spears and axes flashing, chants rising to match the Red Claw howls. The snow turned slick beneath boots and blood alike. "Hold the line!" Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, fierce and commanding. She stood at the center, her spear glinting like a shard of the moon, her golden eyes blazing. Every order snapped into place like frost cracking over stone, her warriors moving with lethal unity around her. Eli covered their flank, firing into gaps, every shot dropping another Red Claw. Still, they kept coming, wave after wave. He muttered under his breath between bursts. "Goddamn endless parade of idiots in red coats." A White Fang warrior nearby barked a laugh, even as he split a Red Claw's skull with his axe. "The Terran curses like a priest." "Better than dying like one," Eli shot back, ducking as an arrow hissed past his head. The warrior cackled and plunged back into the melee. In the center of the camp, Kale fought like a storm given flesh. His massive axe swung in great arcs, cleaving through warriors two at a time. He bellowed White Fang battle chants until his voice cracked raw, his blood mixing freely with that of his enemies. Eli caught sight of him lifting a red claw by the throat and hurling the man bodily into a burning sled. Sparks showered across the snow, catching on cloaks, lighting the night with crackling fury. And still Kale roared, "White Fang does not kneel." "Could have fooled me earlier," Eli muttered, dropping another red claw with a clean shot. Lyra's voice rang out again, closer now. "Eli!" He turned and there she was, blood streaking her jaw, hair wild, eyes burning. She pointed toward the eastern ridge. Red Claw warriors were flooding through a gap, aiming straight for the shelters where children huddled. "Go!" she barked. Eli didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the camp, rifle spitting fire, snow crunching under his boots. His lungs burned, but his legs carried him faster than he thought possible. He reached the shelters just as the first Red Claw broke through. A hulking warrior raised his axe above a terrified boy. Eli fired point blank. The man dropped in a heap, the axe clattering harmlessly into the snow. The children shrieked and scattered, Kale's earlier words ringing in Eli's ears. White Fang does not kneel. Not tonight, they didn't. The battle raged for what felt like hours. The Red Claw pressed harder, their horns and chants never faltering. Eli fought until his rifle clicked dry, then swung it like a club, cracking skulls and breaking jaws. His arms screamed with effort, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He was dimly aware of Lyra's presence always near, her spear flashing in rhythm with his gunfire, their movements weaving together without thought. Where he faltered, she struck. Where she faltered, he covered. It was chaos, blood and fire, and breathless fury. But in the heart of it, Eli realized something that chilled him more than the cold. They weren't losing. For all their numbers, for all their fury, the Red Claw hadn't broken the White Fang line. They hadn't claimed the shelters. They hadn't taken the child. And slowly, surely, the tide began to turn. At the height of the clash, Nira appeared again. She stood atop a broken sled at the far side of the camp, her cloak billowing, her golden eyes gleaming through the smoke. She raised her spear high, and the Red Claw roared louder, pressing forward with renewed fury. Her gaze locked on Lyra. For a moment, the sisters simply stared across the battlefield, mirrors of one another, one painted in blood red, the other in snow white. "Yield!" Nira's voice carried over the chaos, sharp as a blade. "Surrender the child! Spare your clan!" Lyra's answer was a laugh, fierce and scornful. She raised her bloodied spear high. "White Fang does not yield!" The clan echoed her cry, their roars shaking the night. Eli felt it in his chest, in his bones. He gritted his teeth, lifted his empty rifle like a banner, and shouted with them. "We do not yield!" The warriors around him bellowed their approval. A dozen golden eyes turned his way, no longer filled with suspicion, but with fire. And Eli, battered and bleeding, realized something insane and undeniable. He belonged. The Red Claw broke. Not all at once, but like ice fracturing under pressure. Their line wavered, splintered, then began to collapse. Warriors fled into the night, horns sounding retreat. The survivors dragged their wounded, their chants turning to desperate shouts. Nira stood tall above the chaos, her smile sharp and cold. She didn't flee, but she didn't press the attack either. Her golden eyes locked with Lyra's one last time. "This is not done," she called. "Winter is long, sister." Then she vanished into the smoke, her warriors scattering around her. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the ragged breathing of the survivors. The White Fangs stood bloodied but unbroken, their chants fading into exhausted murmurs. Eli lowered his rifle, his body trembling, every muscle screaming with fatigue. He looked around at the battered camp, the wounded warriors, the children clinging to mothers. They had survived. Somehow, impossibly, they had survived. Lyra approached him through the haze, her cloak torn, her face smeared with blood and ash. She stopped in front of him, her golden eyes burning into his. "You fought like White Fang," she said simply. Eli managed a crooked grin. "Guess that makes me one of you." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile but close. She reached out, her hand brushing his jaw. The touch was gentle, fleeting, but it carried more weight than any oath. "More than one of us," she murmured. "Mine." Eli's throat tightened. He didn't argue. Couldn't. Not anymore. Around them, the White Fang raised their voices again, chanting Lyra's name, then his, the firelight flickering across their faces. And for the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like a ghost haunting someone else's war. He felt alive. But above them, the sky ship still lingered, its lights cold and watchful. Eli glanced up, his jaw tightening. "This isn't over." Lyra followed his gaze, her golden eyes hardening. "No," she said. "It has only begun." The dawn after the battle was bitter and quiet. The sky burned pale gold, reflecting off snow that was stained in these streaks of crimson. The White Fang moved like ghosts among the wreckage, carrying their wounded, burning the sleds too broken to save. Smoke rose in thin columns, curling into a sky that watched with cold indifference. Eli stood at the edge of camp, rifle slung across his shoulder, staring at the horizon. His body screamed with pain, every bruise and cut a reminder of the night before. Yet he could not rest. His eyes kept drifting upward, to the faint outline of the sky ship still circling above like a patient hawk. They had won against the Red Claw, but Azurin had not left. Lyra joined him, her cloak billowing in the wind, her golden eyes as fierce as ever. She said nothing at first, only stood beside him, her presence steady and unyielding. "They're waiting?" Eli muttered. "For what?" He spat into the snow. "For us to break, for us to starve, for us to give them what they want without them having to bleed for it." Lyra's lips curved faintly. "Then we will not give them that." Eli studied her, exhaustion in his bones but fire in his chest. "You're not afraid, are you?" She turned her gaze toward him, and in those eyes he saw everything. Fear buried under steel, love bound by choice, defiance that no storm could extinguish. "I am terrified," she admitted softly, "but fear is not surrender. It is a weapon, and I will wield it until it cuts them." Eli couldn't help it. He laughed, low and rough. "God, you're impossible," she smirked. "Good." Their eyes locked, heat flaring between them despite the bitter cold. For a moment the world narrowed, the ship forgotten, the war forgotten. There was only her, only them. Then Kale's voice shattered the stillness. "Scouts return!" They turned as a group of weary warriors staggered into camp, bloodied but alive. One fell to his knees before Lyra, gasping for breath. "Red Claw retreating," he rasped. "North, toward the valley." Lyra's jaw tightened. They regroup. "Nira will not yield the field so easily." The scout shook his head. "No, she does not march to fight. She marches to trade." The words cut through the air like a blade. Eli's stomach dropped. "Trade?" The scout nodded weakly. "She meets with the Sky Men." A hush fell over the camp. Warriors exchanged dark, furious looks. Lyra's eyes burned like molten fire. "She dares," she whispered. Eli cursed. "Of course she dares. Why fight a war when you can sell one? She's offering Azurin exactly what they want. A foothold, a contract, blood disguised as commerce." Kyle growled low in his throat. "What do we do?" Lyra looked to Eli. Her eyes were sharp, but beneath them he saw something else. Trust. "What do you say, Taryn?" Eli exhaled slowly, his mind racing. "We can't stop the meeting. Not directly. If we show up in force, Azurin will spin it as savages resisting stability. If we kill Nira outright, Red Claw fractures into a dozen warbands. They'll burn everything from here to the glaciers." Lyra's voice was a blade. "Then what?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Then we beat them at their own game." Her brows furrowed. "How?" He looked up at the ship again, its cold lights glinting in the pale sky. "By making the ground more valuable than the deal they're offering." By evening, the plan was in motion. Eli moved among the warriors, directing them not to sharpen blades, but to drag sleds toward the vents, to pour tar into cracks, to scatter frostmaw bones across the ridgelines. Every move felt insane, but the White Fang followed, their chants rising as they worked. Lyra strode beside him, her presence lending weight to every order. When a warrior hesitated, her voice silenced doubt. When hands faltered, her gaze steadied them. Finally, Kale approached, his massive frame looming. "Explain this madness again," he demanded. Eli wiped sweat from his brow, pointing toward the vents where black smoke now curled thick into the sky. We're not trying to win a battle. We're trying to sell a story. Azuran thinks this valley is an asset. Stable, predictable, easy to exploit. So we make it look like hell. Cal frowned. Hell? Unprofitable, Eli corrected. We choke their sensors, poison their readings, flood their reports with lies. We make them think this place will bleed them dry long before it pays them back. Kyle's scarred face split into a grin. A war of numbers, Eli smirked. Exactly. And if there's one thing I know, it's how to make a ledger scream. Lyra watched him, her golden eyes unreadable. But when she spoke, her voice was soft. You fight differently than us. Eli met her gaze. Yeah, but maybe that's why I'm here. That night, the sky ship descended lower, scanning the valley. Its floodlights cut across the smoke, the tar, the bones arranged like warnings. The air shimmered with heat from the vents, warping every image their cameras tried to capture. From the ridge, Eli watched with Lyra at his side. Kyle and the warriors crouched behind them, his heart hammered, his palms slick with sweat. The ship hovered, its engines humming. Then the voice came again, filtered and false. Azuran recognizes this valley as contested territory. Reassessment in progress. Stakeholders advised to withdraw pending evaluation. Eli let out a shaky breath. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't conquest either. They had bought time. Lyra's hand found his, squeezing once, hard. You lied to the sky, she whispered. He smirked. First time I've enjoyed it. She laughed softly, fierce and warm all at once. Then perhaps you are White Fang after all. Eli looked at her, at the clan gathered, at the boy who slept safely beside Kale's massive frame. And for the first time since he'd landed on this frozen world, he didn't feel like a fugitive or a ghost. He felt like a man with something worth protecting. The war wasn't over. Nera would return. Azuran would circle back. But for tonight, under the smoke and stars, they had survived. And survival was the first step to legend. The smoke of the vents clung to the valley long after the ship pulled away, its floodlights fading into the night sky like a retreating predator. But no one in the White Fang camp cheered. Victory was a strange thing here. Thin, fragile, a reprieve instead of an ending. Eli stood by the fire, watching the warriors move through the wreckage. They were alive. That was enough for now. Yet he knew in his gut this was only the opening move of a much longer game. Lyra approached him, her cloak singed, her hair tangled, her golden eyes sharp even in exhaustion. She looked at him the way she always did now, as though he were both answer and question. You turned the sky away, she said softly. For tonight, Eli replied. Tomorrow they'll run the numbers again. Find another reason to come back. That's what they do. They don't stop. Lyra's jaw tightened. Then we will not stop either. He almost smiled. You're a stubborn woman. She tilted her head. And you are a stubborn man. Perhaps that is why the ice hasn't killed you yet. Their eyes held, and for a moment, the war, the smoke, the blood, all of it slipped away. There was only her, fierce and unyielding, and the warmth that burned between them, despite the frozen world. Before he could answer, Kyle loomed over them, the child perched on his broad shoulder. The boy's golden eyes gleamed as he looked from Eli to Lyra, and back again, a quiet curiosity in his gaze. Kyle's scarred face broke into a grin. The cub likes you, Taryn. That may be the hardest trial you've passed yet. Eli barked a laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. Great. Survive a frost maw, a binding circle, and 2 wars. And what really counts is babysitting approval. Kyle chuckled, clapping him on the back so hard Eli nearly staggered. Now you sound White Fang. The words carried more weight than Kale intended. For the first time, Eli realized they weren't just calling him outsider anymore. They weren't just tolerating him. They were beginning to claim him. Later that night, as the fires burned low and the warriors sang old songs of survival, Eli sat apart, staring at the stars. Lyra joined him, silent for a while before speaking. My sister will come again, she said. Eli nodded. Yeah, people like her don't walk away. Not when they think they've been cheated. Lyra's fingers tightened around the fur at her cloak's edge. She was not always like this. Once she laughed with me under these same stars. Once she promised me we would rule together side by side. Now she sells her blood to men who know nothing of our songs. Eli studied her profile in the dim light, the pain etched into her features. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that Nera had made her choice, but he knew better. Words like that rang hollow in places where family and betrayal were carved deeper than bone. Instead, he said quietly, "Then we make sure when she comes again, she finds a wall she can't climb." Lyra turned her gaze toward him, golden eyes burning. "You would stand with me, even against her?" Eli's throat tightened. "I already have." Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Then Lyra reached out, her hand brushing his cheek. "Then perhaps the old songs will speak of you too, Eli Veron." He caught her hand, holding it against his skin. "Not songs, stories. Songs fade. Stories last." Her lips curved, soft but fierce. "Then we will make a story worth the ice remembering." By morning, the camp had begun to rebuild. Warriors repaired sleds, sharpened weapons, set new traps along the ridges. The White Fang moved with grim determination, their chants steady, their resolve unbroken. Eli walked among them, offering advice, sharing tricks from old Terran campaigns. At first, the warriors listened with suspicion. By midday, they listened with respect. By evening, some even laughed at his rough humor, echoing his curses in clumsy Terran tongue until the camp roared with laughter. It was awkward, absurd, and strangely perfect. For the first time since he had stepped onto this frozen world, Eli felt less like a ghost and more like a man shaping something bigger than himself. That night, Lyra found him again, standing at the edge of the ridge, watching the distant glow of the skyship. "They will be back," she said. "I know. Naira will be back too." "I know that too." Lyra stepped closer, her cloak brushing his arm, her warmth steady against the cold. "Then we prepare, together." Eli looked at her, at the clan bustling below, at the boy curled safely in Kale's arms. For years he had lived as a man running from wars he couldn't win. But here, on this frozen hell, he had found something worth bleeding for. He exhaled slowly, his breath curling white in the night air. "Together," he said. Lyra's hand found his, fingers intertwining, her grip fierce. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and in that gaze he saw the truth he had been running from all along. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was choosing, and that choice was her. The wind howled across the valley, carrying with it the echoes of war and the promise of more battles to come. The stars burned cold above, indifferent and eternal. But down below, in the heart of the White Fang camp, a new story had begun. The story of a Terran soldier who had come to vanish in the ice. The story of a chieftain who refused to kneel to the sky. The story of a clan that endured. And somewhere, watching from the shadows, Nera smiled, already weaving her next move. The legend was only beginning. And so, in every battle fought and every secret revealed, we are reminded of one truth. Sometimes survival is not enough. You must choose who you will fight for and who you will love. If this story struck you, share it with those who dare to listen. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe now, because even greater stories are waiting just beyond the storm.